We're a local authority or a private nursing home provider.
Yes.
And we're in the business of looking after people who no longer wish or are able to look after themselves in their own homes. And in a welfare state model, either a state agency or a voluntary provider provides. There may be a degree of inspection associated with that, but that inspection is not necessarily related to a particular set of expectations as to what should be provided. What HICO has done in recent years has been to write down with more specificity what is to be provided. They haven't gone for the, I think, the mistake of these huge long lists that we used in the United States, became checklists. It's rather a mix of principle and detail. And the importance of principle is that it requires the nursing home providers then to work out themselves, with their staff, with their clientele, to work out what the principles require and deliver. And, you know, I go to nursing homes pretty regularly, and you know immediately. You know it's a sort of blink moment. You know when you walk across the threshold whether you're in a well-run place or not, because the way things smell, the way you're welcomed or not, the way you're treated. If you're treated like a family member rather than a strange visitor, the way that the whole setup, you know immediately. It's very hard to capture that in a set of detailed standards. So in the nursing home case, it's been about putting a lot more structure around inspection, expectation of nursing homes without necessarily writing everything down. And the case, take a second example of provision of utility services. I'm a blow-in, so don't necessarily remember telephone service in the 1970s. But my understanding is that no one had any sense of entitlement around the installation of a phone line. They applied. We assumed there was corruption around the provision of telephone service to some people. Others had to wait. If you weren't in line for to benefit from corruption, then you had to wait maybe 18 months, 2 years to get a phone line. But you had no entitlement to a phone line. Whereas today, if your phone service is off the blink for a day or two, you're entitled to conversation around it. Very specific service standards around both fixed line and mobile telephony, and of course also, which would be the thing, the ideological component here might be say, and furthermore, you've also got market choices, so you can exit a service provider who's not meeting expectations, in addition to being able to enforce detailed specification, which may then also be enforced by the regulator as well as an aspect of general service quality specified in licenses.
Do you see any means at all in terms of institutional redesign of shortening the feedback loops in order to enhance service provision while enhancing what I would call one of the key things of democracy, visibility of resources and outcomes?
There's a tendency to use establishment of regulatory agencies as a mechanism for blame shifting. And so saying, well, so the Minister of Communications says, well, the fact there's problems with broadband, it's not my problem, it's the regulator, you must refer to the regulator. Now, it's interesting that in the case of water, the government's not been able to give away responsibility. I mean, the functions around water have been assigned to others, and they've failed to give it away politically. They cannot get rid of it through assigning the regulatory responsibility to the energy regulator, nor to assigning the delivery responsibility to Irish Water. So in that sense, the feedback loops aren't as long as you might think, but it would be, water would probably have been a better story for government had they been able to make those distinctions clearer. And as to institutional design, so the problem of co-locating the political responsibility with the delivery responsibility is the risk you'll have political interference with decision-making around delivery choices. That's a worrying enough thing in a large state. In a small state with tight social networks, it does create an anxiety that for example, and some works Jane Suter has done, has tended to demonstrate very significant resource allocation decisions being shaped by the constituencies of the ministers in power. So it does raise a real anxiety, and the separation of the delivery from the policy function, if you like, then with independent oversight, perhaps of both, does provide some assurance that you won't get what we might call illegitimate political decision making, as opposed to legitimate political decision making. So there's something to be said for that separation, but then excessively long feedback loops, of course, can be a problem, and the worry about hiding the ball. I suspect that the answer is to bring your questions to any particular sector to engage in institutional design and be very clear about where responsibilities lie, not just for oversight and rulemakers, but also for advocacy, for promoting learning about the sector. And that's the point at which you might draw the NGOs in and give them a formal responsibility, as some EU instruments do. They give NGOs a formal responsibility to undertake, for example, certain monitoring tasks or certain advocacy tasks. So I think the right questions that can be answered in particular sectors only, rather than by reference to general principles.
Seen from another perspective, you could say that, taking Ireland as an example, or other Western countries, there's been a deregulation, so financial sector, light touch regulation. So I understand there's a lot of more regulatory agencies, but how would that literature answer that? Saying that we have a lot of regulations, but in fact we seem to have lost control, let's say, over the financial sector or other healthcare or anything.
The financial sector, a number of problems in the commercial financial sector. I mean, there was the one that all of the inquiries in the US, UK, Ireland said about failure to understand systemic risk, failure to understand the interconnectedness of the various complex transactions between the banks. There was a sort of, and the market actors didn't understand the risks they faced from that one set of issues. I mean, in Ireland, the Hunnan report found that social networks were part of the problem, that junior officials dealing with rules and seeking to enforce the rules would find matters got referred up from banks to more senior officials within the central bank or within the financial regulator, and that the ambition of the more junior officials to enforce the rules was trumped by the socially driven motivations of those higher up who said, oh no, we won't enjoy the golf so much next week if we start enforcing the rules against the banks. And you may recall when Matthew Elderfield stepped down from a position as independent financial regulator, he told the Financial Times, he was asked, how did you manage this transformation? Maybe too soon to tell, but a claim transformation in financial regulation. I said, well, I don't play golf with bankers. Straightforward as that. Now, it's not as simple as that. Light touch, I think, in Ireland was not a design system. It was, in substantial part, a consequence of the environment of social networks impacting on a rule system that was not as bad as it's suggested to be. And light touch regulation is one thing. If you say that's the same as principles-based regulation, I would be inclined to reject that argument. The principles-based regulation, as contrasted with light touch, involves not only challenging banks to devise appropriate norms to regulate their own conduct, it also involves very extensive verification and monitoring of what they're doing and how they're doing it. And that's the bit that was missing from banking regulation in Ireland. There was lack of stringency around monitoring, around thinking through implications at the regulatory level, in addition to the underlying lack of understanding, even amongst the market actors, of the systemic risk that they faced. And Honohan admits in what he says that, and there's wider analysis, that part of both those phenomena was an excessive dependence on the interests and motivations of the financial market actors. So there was a political element in the sense of an interplay of interests in which one group of interests was being favoured another. And those three things together was a heady mix. But I think I'd separate them and tackle them separately rather than look at them as one.